All right, so first off, if you emailed me this weekend, I had an email issue. I am still getting some dribbling in now that were sent to me like Friday and Saturday, which is always interesting. So I apologize for that if that happened to you. It started with changing my email password, which shouldn't be a horrible thing, but for whatever reason it is on my account, last Thursday. Everything seemed to work. My phone was still getting email. You can hang around, Ethan. I don't care. Oh. So, oh, it's. So I didn't really think anything of it because my phone's getting email and I'm out of town on Saturday. When I get home Saturday night and I try to log in on the computer and it won't let me log in, and it just says your email password's expired. I'm like, oh crap! Because for whatever reason we've had this issue before. And part of it is I don't log into the domain here because I like to control my own destiny and things like that. So I emailed actually our director, Gene, and Gene couldn't get it fixed Sunday and actually had to call in one of his guys locally, and they were in here doing some other stuff and hopefully have it fixed. But it's kind of weird today. All of a sudden I'm dribbling in emails that I know were actually sent like Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So if I do not respond or did not respond to a question, I apologize. And if I sent a reply and you haven't got a response, I also apologize if some of those didn't get through because I'm always suspicious of that. So I throw that out as my apology before we start doing anything else this week. So I did start peeking through. So Sunday morning is my holy cow. I've got all this stuff that turns in on Sunday night, and I started looking through all the materials. And so what I looked at, and you'll see I'm starting to make giant comments all over your documents, is I really had two models of people turning in materials. So some were too specific, almost to the point of it's not necessary, and some were, and the majority though were too vague about what. So here's an example of that from one is it's a touchscreen computer from 3 years ago. Okay, that's good information. Got a little bit. Well, we don't know what brand it is. There's an off-brand that you can't even get support for. What are its specs? So basic specs. Does it have 8 gigabytes of RAM? And what that's leading to is, because then the next sentence was, it still has Windows 7. And Windows 7 support died in January. Depending on your business, you may be required to have all of those Windows 7 machines out of your office. So if you, and I'm going to pick on you because you're in the insurance industry, some of the insurance companies say, hey, we don't want any Windows 7 machines around because they're a security hole now at this point with no security updates. Other companies could care less. If you're working in a governmental agency and you're dealing with the State Patrol has been very adamant that says Windows 7 machines or older are gone. How do we fix that? So it doesn't give you enough information to make that decision in the next step of that project of, all right, so it's 3 years old. We don't know anything about it other than it's 3 years old, so clearly it's running Windows 7. Is it worth upgrading to Windows 10? So two schools of thought on the Windows 10 upgrade right now. So if you haven't had to experience this, Microsoft had a free upgrade in 2016. It expired. However, the website to go to download the USB media tool and actually upgrade still is running. And they left that on for some reasons internally, I'm sure. Here's the legal issue. I can, as a company, go out and download, and it appears to be that I upgraded my laptop or my desktop from Windows 7 to Windows 10. But if I haven't purchased a legal license, I could be in trouble at some point if Microsoft decides to audit me. Now, the reality with a small corporation with 10 people in it, Microsoft's probably not going to ever mess with you, and you're probably okay. Bigger organization, anybody under scrutiny. But it's kind of that moral issue of, do we go out and do we do it or not? So one of the things you might find for recommendations is saying, hey, I need to upgrade this computer from Windows 7 Pro to Windows 10 Professional. If I have to go buy a license, it's $150 to $200 a license. That's a big chunk of change for a lot of companies. So we take that into account and we have to look at it. But I have to have that base knowledge before that. So I wouldn't upgrade any computer if it didn't have 8 gigabytes of RAM. And I would probably say, hey, let's spend $50 and put a solid state drive in it at the same time if I'm going to do a 3-year-old computer, if it's even worth doing. If it's one of these weird Pentium J things that when you turn it on, it takes 10 minutes to load and you can watch paint dry as you try to type, it's probably up for replacement anyway, and in your next section you would address that. But if I don't have those details, so other ones that I've ran into and I saw in there were, well, this computer has some kind of Microsoft Office. What version? Are there differences in versions? Are they using an Office 365 where they're paying a monthly or yearly subscription? Or is this a copy of Office 2007 that's now aged out and probably isn't as useful? So those kinds of details matter. I also saw a lot of ones where we didn't have some of the fundamental pieces that may be important, and part of that is biased by my security means. I saw several say, well, we have some wireless. Okay, so do you have the $49 Belkin router from Walmart? Is that what your business is based on as the primary port of interface? That's what's protecting all of your internal documents? So those details, and so you'll see when I start writing back that I'm going to hammer on some of those. Now, does this mean you can change every company? Probably not. And in fact, you're going to run into, well, it works, so why should I change it? Well, Kmart, our POS system worked until it got hacked and we lost 140 million credit card records. Beatrice, our system works until we lost every city record due to ransomware. New Orleans, hey, it worked. Oh, wait, we lost records there. State Capital Wireless, still, this is interesting to me. A week ago, the state wireless at the Capitol was shut off. Nobody has said why. Nobody said if it's turned on again or not. Just kind of a mystery. Nobody knows what happened. Just because it's worked in the past doesn't mean it's going to always work in the future, and it doesn't mean it's secure. So I hound a little bit on security just because that's kind of where a lot of my focus is, but I really don't want a company to be hammered, and the cost of recovering from some of these security incidents is very severe. So if you don't have backups and you get hit with a ransomware, you have no choice other than to lose your data or pay whatever that ransomware is. Either way, it looks really bad. And if I paid to get my ransomware back or my files back, am I ever going to feel comfortable? No. I would still want to spend a tremendous amount of money starting over on my network in a lot of cases, and my backup procedures and my other things. So when you see my comments as I start putting them in there and sending them back to you, you're going to see a lot of those pieces. So this week, we're going to look at how do we actually then start designing things. So tying into, now we've evaluated, now we're going to start looking at how do we design a lot of this changes. And you're not building an ERP system from the ground in most of your projects. That'd be a very ambitious project if you were able to pull that off. But in the next hour, we're going to cover a lot of material. So the other piece, for those of you that are on campus, that's a little bit of a critical plot point is we will not have on-campus class on Wednesday. Unless you guys all want to meet me at the dermatologist. And then we could have class in their lobby, because I know it will take that long. So, my $20,000 a month medicine has had some weird side effects, so I get to go visit the dermatologist. I guess I should. It was only $19,000 is what the insurance company got charged last month. So we've had some weird side effects, so we're going to go visit them on Wednesday. Not that I don't love every one of you, but I think we can cover this really quickly. So that analysis, your investigation says, what do we need? Our design tells us how we're going to build it. So think of this if we're planning to build a race car. All of our research says these are the things we need in it. We need a motor, we need a front end, we need sheet metal and all those things. Now we're looking at how do we actually design it? And how do we start putting those pieces together? So we're gonna take what those requirements are to actually implement them. So some of these tools that we're going to run into are a really great idea. How do we not get blindsided by things? How do we define it from best practice from the beginning? And if we could go back in a lot of our businesses and we had unlimited funds and we could go back and start over, we probably would. But we know that's not always the case. And we certainly know that businesses don't have unlimited funds, except for insurance agencies, right? Tell your dad that. They have unlimited money to do anything they want to do. So this is kind of our conceptual model. So we're going to understand what we're doing. We take all those models in the documents and we feed it in to this and create our design objectives. And then finally we build a new system coming out of there. So you're creating a living, breathing document through this project. One of the best ways we do this is really that idea of modeling. If I just come up to you and I say, hey, we can create a database to store all of your DVDs, maybe that's the goal. If I just tell you that, that's certainly different than if I went out and I used Microsoft Access, which if you've been around me a long time, you know that just the thought of saying Microsoft Access makes my head hurt a little bit. But it's a great, really quick tool. I designed one really quickly in Access so you could see what it looked like. It's got 10 DVDs. You can see how it would interact. That gives you that ability to demonstrate that model really, really quickly. So if I don't do design work ahead of time, and I don't take this ability to see what my end users really want and what my design requirements are, my guess is most of you, the first website you did in Ms. Perriot's class, you said, I'm just going to sit down at the computer and I can just bang out some code and I'm going to have a website that looks really good. And you're going to go, oh, that looked really bad when I got done. We didn't do the storyboarding. You didn't do the design work up front. And so that's what we have to be careful of, is making sure that we don't do that. So how formal the project is, or the scale of the project, often dictates also how many models and how many different types of iterations we start doing. So different types of projects fit different models. And there isn't a one-size-fits-all for some of these. So we have to look at it. So models are typically used. Depending on if we use Agile or what programming model we use to create this end project, our end result, we may have less models. We may have few models. But those models can guide us in what we're going to do. So here's some of our stuff. We've already done this. We've done the domain models. We've done use case. You've done the system sequence. You've done activity diagrams. And now we're going to translate into, and so here we have domain model classes translate into design class. And you knew they looked a lot like that database. So this is kind of our translation or our crossover from one document to another. We may have other ones. You may have components. You may have deployment diagrams. You may have all different kinds of output, because one of the things you're going to have to do along this journey is keep reassuring that owner that, yes, this is the proper model, this is what we want to do, and this is why we're doing it. Now, again, if you overload them and you throw 30 different models and 30 diagrams at them, probably not a great model for success. So what we need to do is make sure we have the appropriate one that sells it. So think about when I'm trying to sell a financial tool to somebody, one well-placed graph. It keeps sounding like I'm picking on you today. So one well-placed graph showing what the time value of money over 10 years can be is a very effective tool. On the other hand, if I handed them a 6-inch stack of prospectuses of different tools for investments, that's probably less effective. So we need to make sure we have the appropriate tool in there. So we need to worry about the environment we're going to be in. If we're doing a ERP style system, that user interface, what kind of end users are in there? What kind of pieces are we adding? So software classes, methods, all of those. So we're going to have to think about, on these activities, how is what we're changing going to interact with the existing environment? So how are we going to change things? How does that change the existing environment? So think about even a workplace environment. One of the things we do in a lot of cases is we say, well, you know, for security, we're going to put cameras in. If all of a sudden your workplace shows up and you have cameras anywhere, does your workplace environment change? Yeah, for a lot of people, they're very offended by cameras everywhere. You don't trust me. Well, I've been here for 35 years and we've never had to have cameras before. But has the outside environment changed also? So we look back. Have we had slip and fall accidents? There's now people that are majoring in slip and fall accidents, just from a liability standpoint. So one of the things we can do is we can talk to those end users, address their concerns, and show them what the benefit is. So maybe they haven't had a theft issue, but maybe they've had a customer come back and say, I'm sure I handed you a 20. And so now you've adopted more if you've been in the casino style of cash handling, where you don't hand it to them directly, you fan it on the table and there's a camera on it. More and more places are doing that to avoid that issue. We can look at, how do we look at electronic records? How do we stop those kinds of things? And if there is a theft, so there was recently a theft in Plattsmouth at a hardware store. It actually alerted the camera, and the guy's watching on his phone while the guy's running around in his store. So if you saw the news article on that, it was kind of interesting. The guy tried to hide in the basement, and they found him clearly. Great. So we're trying to change that environment a little bit. So user interface. How are our users going to interact with this new system? Whether it's we changed my PSC, whether it's we put in a new system at work, we got rid of a accounting system we've used forever. Think about that training component on the back end. And that's one we lose a lot of times. We go through and we say, well, we've analyzed it, we spent all this money to analyze, we spent all this money to implement it, but I think our users are going to be able to figure it out. You guys probably can. But think about the bottom half of the employees. Remember those people that it's always a bit of a struggle for training. So make sure that those parts come in there, that you haven't lost those. So we're also going to, if we're designing a database in there, or we're using an existing, how are we getting that information? How does it pass from one database to the other? Is it done securely? So one of the things we look at now, are we moving that data encrypted? And again, that security piece coming to mind. Are we moving that data securely? Because now, where do we hide those databases? Are they local to our company? Or where are we putting them? There's this white fluffy thing up in the sky that we look out at occasionally, and it's here in the cloud. We're moving more and more of these structures out in the cloud. There can be a lot of advantages to that, but I also have to make sure that I'm designing that correctly, and that data doesn't go unencrypted. That we know that we have access to get that data back. I worked with an organization that they bought a system to do data backup. And the system that they bought said, we're going to store it locally. And so we have a box, essentially a machine here, and we store it on our cloud, and it's all secure and it's all great. Okay. And they had bought that lock, stock, and barrel. And one of the things I will stress a lot about backups, unless you test them to make sure that they work, you don't know that it's really a backup. So they actually said, after a little talking with me, we need to probably test this out. Lo and behold, they can't get to their data on their own. The way this company encrypted it and secured it, they didn't have access to their own data that they're supposedly backing up. This system was a lot of money. Somewhere between $250,000 and $300,000, which, at least for me, is a lot of money. It's probably not for Google, but for a small organization like this one, it was a lot of money they spent on it. So we all kind of had a conference call with the company selling them the system, and finally they decided they could do a one-time data extraction so you could see if the backup really was there, and they would only charge them a $80,000 charge for that. So this whole company was built on the idea that if you needed that data, you were going to pay a significant fortune of money to get it back. And we did this, and it was actually backing up the data, but that was not a price, and they paid a lot of money for this to get this data back. We looked at alternatives pretty quickly, and we probably spent as much as this company was to start with for some backup solutions, but they owned the data and they could access it at any point in time. Imagine an $80,000 charge just to view your data for one time to do a test backup. It was the craziest thing I have ever seen. And I posted it on a lot of forums because people buying this system, most of them didn't realize, and they weren't finishing that loop. They weren't completing that step of backup. And it's not a question I would probably think to ask to begin with. But now it is. So now so I was on the content management system committee here where we're looking at what we're going to replace our website with. That's one of the questions is, if we go with your system, are we allowed to get our own data back off at any time? And we certainly looked at that, how to get that and how to secure our own data. Had I not had that experience, I wouldn't think about that. So what about our design for our database and our design for those? Is it done logically? Is it done robustly? Is it done efficiently? So one of the pieces we a lot of times have in this environment, how do we communicate with these systems, whether they're internal or external? And so I talked about the cloud, and we need to look at that message format to make sure it's a compatible format that they can communicate with our system. So if we're running QuickBooks, can we manage to send data back and forth? You would think that there were some preset standards for most businesses, and there are, but every company says, hey, I'm going to do something a little differently. So healthcare is one that some of this data, no company wants to send it out without charging you for an interface. So Falls City Hospital used to use a software product called Healthland Dairy Systems. It actually worked. It was not very pretty. It looked like it was designed in 1980. But every time we had to create an interface to another system, so Cardinal Health heart monitoring or something, to interface in and add that to your patient record, it was $10,000 to $50,000 for them to design an interface because they didn't already have those things designed. Now, what was always interesting was you were the first customer to pay that, and then they'd be happy to resell that at a lower price to somebody else. So it didn't always behoove you to be the one that jumps out there. So what about our network? Making sure that protocol, security, making sure that security is up to date. How do I recover that data? So that's another piece, and you'll hear me talk over and over again about database recovery and how we do that. So the greatest one, little short story I have, I had built a shop down in Falls City and I needed power to it. And so because I had a residence there and they had a second meter, they of course said, hey, that's commercial. And all I'm going to do in there is store cars and crap and toys that I don't need. But I went along with them. I did some work with the city anyway, and I had to put down, I think it was a $500 deposit for electric service in this building. that literally when it first got in there, I had the mask set up and I had one plug-in. But I was going to put lights and things in there, but I hadn't had it done yet. $500 deposit. So month goes around, my bill, $21. Minimum charges. Great. They called me and they said, hey, can you help us with our database? We have something that happened with it. I go, okay, what's the problem? Well, Falls City is about 4,000 people, somewhere around there. They have about 3,000 clients in the utility department. And they were showing 45 clients in their database. So my first snarky response was, yep, I'm going to come fix it, but I can tell you the bill is going to be at least $500 for that deposit. As it turns out, it was way more than that because they had managed to have a database issue and they had a backup issue. And remember I said backups are always important, and I shouldn't tell on these people down there because it can happen to anybody. And it's many years ago and we fixed it, but they had the backup method that a lot of us do. It's manual. Hey, we're going to put in a flash drive. We're going to back up. They had gotten a little more sophisticated. They had portable hard drives. They would plug it in, and they would run a backup of their system every day, except for this one little problem. The person in charge of doing the backups had been very conscientious, doing them every couple of days, every week, whatever it was they had for their schedule, except they had went on vacation for a month. So what we had to do was go back and recreate a lot of data because we didn't have a backup for 6 weeks. It's not as though we could just go back and recreate that. And in that 6 weeks' time, so utility bills are assessed and sent out every month, we had to go back and try to hope that all that data was in the system. And I managed to patch it all back together, and then we came up with a much better plan. And they agreed that maybe they should spend some money on a backup system at that point, other than just a manual backup. If you can do it, and you're going to do it, great. My guess is we're all guilty of this. How many times have we said, I'm going to save all these files on a flash drive so I can make a copy of them? And then you didn't. I lost all my backup many years ago. I had all my stuff for all my classes on a flash drive. And I thought that was a great idea because, I got it on a flash drive. It can go with me. This was kind of pre-Cloudian days, but it's on a flash drive. Had all the answers for the test, everything for class. And I used their men's restroom. And I'm leaning over this device that's got a bowl of water. And I didn't get it all the way clicked in. It was a little snap latch. It dropped and fell right in the toilet. And that's when I decided I needed a better backup for all my documents. So it can happen. So here we have kind of this idea of a couple of different pieces. And so you're going to recognize some of these from other classes. So in this model up here, we have a component diagram on the top right. So this really says, here we have a user interface. It's going to use a web browser. It's going to connect it through the internet. We hit an application server, and what apps are we going to use? Well, in this case, our pages, we're going to use PHP or ASP, which is Active Server Pages, or Java, Cold Fusion, whatever technologies, maybe Ruby on Rails, whatever technologies you're using, now we're listing out explicitly how we're doing that. So we're starting to bring out, this is what we already are using in most cases. Let's just extend what we have. Here we have what we call a view layer. So here we show the data layer down at the bottom, domain layer, so that's where our application server, and then that view layer. Kind of a takeoff on that OSI model, honestly. So we have different ways we can conceptually start looking at how we're going to do that. So here we have a package diagram. And again, we're really talking all about the same system. This one just shows it slightly different and shows how we're moving those around from the online cart to inventory. And again, that's also set up in view layer, domain, and data access layer. So these really work hand in hand together when you're trying to demonstrate and show how things are going to interact. Probably the most important thing, at least as far as those end users, is What does that user interface look like, and how does it work? If I don't make it convenient for my end user, they're not going to use it. If I don't make it pretty for my end user, they're going to think I adopted something from 1987. I want it to be usable. I want it to be configurable. So different users have different needs. If every user had the same home screen to start with, and they had to click 3 layers deep to do their job for every task, and we've seen a lot of those that are like that, they're not very user-friendly. So this is where we get those end users, in most cases, trying to come up with what we're going to look at. So maybe we have a design committee in our company if we're a large company, and we actually make that a set of universal standards. So everything looks very similar. As you get older, and you guys are all nice and young, and you're willing to change, but as you get older, we're reluctant to change. And if something looks different for no good reason, because on this page we had to go click on the left, and on this page we had to click on the right, that makes it very silly. We've done those where we've screwed up user interfaces, even at our own college here. And we're hopefully changing it this year. But I will tell you the biggest one I can think of that is odd is our teaching evaluation. So when you guys go take a teaching evaluation, and everybody in here's had them, right? And that's where you write all the nasty comments and go, man, this instructor made us do stuff, and he was really bad, and he always told us these weird stories. We didn't care. We just wanted to get on and go out and go play football. We did something really weird. So if I just gave you a normal Likert scale, you guys have all had statistics. What does a normal Likert scale rank from? 1 to 5. And in our brain, we already think 1 is bad, 5 is good, right? So every other survey you have ever taken in your life ranks 1 is bad, 5 is good. Here in a couple of weeks, you're going to get our survey. What do you think we've done with ours? You guys know? Do you remember? Did we do something really dumb and put ours completely opposite, where 1 is good and 5 is bad? And so we're always concerned, or at least I am, is, hey, we're trying to educate you guys in statistics and show you design practices, and here we completely flip the scale. And if you don't read it, and I know some very good instructors on our campus who had a couple or 3 students who would always mark 5s all the way across, which is bad. And I think that had something to do with it. We're so conditioned. You get a survey from Burger King, and it's a 1 through 5 scale, you're going to go 1 through 5. We also did some other things. We left out the not applicable. So if whatever the question is doesn't apply to you, what are you going to mark on a 1 to 5 scale? You just mark a 3? That's what most people do. But if we're really taking that number and looking for an average score, can 3 hurt you even though it doesn't apply? Yeah. Well, we did some really, really bad things on those. So I'm not sure our new model is going to be any better, but we really needed to take the common interface. We're used to those nomenclatures that when you do that. So there are other interfaces. When we change them, so great, I can handle Facebook. I know how Facebook works. But this Snapchat requires you to swipe down, left, right, left, up, down. It's different, and for a lot of people, it's an impediment to them using that as a tool. So hopefully we can come up with one very similar type of interfaces, especially when we're looking at that ERP system, so that they look very similar. So when we design this ERP system, we even use that term storyboarding, just like we do in web design, because you're really creating a web page or a interface to each one of those. And it's getting easier for us to do, because now we don't typically download software on your computer. You're going to it as a web interface. And so it really is web design on the end goal. And so you want to make sure that it makes sense. So here your end users would evaluate those things. But imagine slides 1 and 2. If we made one change in there, and instead of saying browse, share, cart, orders, we just changed the order randomly, that would be very confusing for our end users. And so those are the kinds of things we want to avoid if we can. We want to make it clear. We want to make it consistent. We do probably want to make it tunable so that based on your login, it goes to the screen that you use the most. That makes a lot of sense to be able to do that. So this tool, not only does it have a web size component, it's really what we're going to call responsive design. You may have heard that term if you're in the web design. But we've also made it where it sits on a small screen. So more and more items we find are being done on your phone or on a tablet. We have over half of the people logging into Blackboard now are logging in with their phone. I don't know how you're doing things like discussion boards and assignments on a phone, but evidence says that that's where a lot of you are coming into Blackboard. Now, I hope it's just to check your grades and it's not really because that's where you're living at in the Blackboard world. But the numbers seem to bear that out. And I have seen some discussion board postings I can think are probably actually typed on a phone. So this will be a review. We're going to talk about that database piece. And that's why I said this week we can probably slide through in one class and get most of this done. It also gives me some time then to start giving you feedback on this pretty big chunk to prepare you for the next section. So we're going to create, in most cases, a relational database. Or we're going to interface with an existing relational database. Does it have to be a relational database? There are some non-SQL, non-relational databases that are now being used. There's some flat file models depending on your system. If you're using something like QuickBooks, does QuickBooks use a form of a database? Yeah. So we have some technical pieces we even want to look at. How quickly does it respond? When it is time to enroll for your classes, and all of a sudden my PSC went from snap, 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 and all of a sudden there's 1,000 students in there, and it seems like it takes forever. We've all been there, right? That responsiveness or throughput or output. We also want to address security. So we want to see if we can maintain security through this phase. So, typical table scheme. So this is actually showing you something called MyAdmin for PHP. So here we have some tables. Here we're looking at how do we create different types. And so it looks similar to the Access you guys have used before. But so options are a variable character of 12 units long. So we can put attributes, whether they're allowed to be nulls. So almost all of the relational databases work very similarly. We just have to think about what those little technical differences are between them. So if I've built it on Postgres, can I move it to Microsoft SQL? Yes. I'll have some tweaking to do, and there's even some tools to allow me to do that. If I put it in Access, Access isn't really, it does some of the SQL, but it's not very compliant, and it has some limitations in terms of size. But it's a good modeling tool. If I want to model it and show it to somebody, I can sketch up an Access database pretty quickly. So now we're going to think about, all right, now we've kind of got an idea. We know we're going to have to interface to this database. Now we're going to get into a little more detailed about things like so here's our design class. But notice now we've added a couple of new items that we didn't have before. So this is our table customer. But our customer table, so here's the items that are in there. Now start having at the bottom something called a method, or essentially a verb you're adding to it. They can do things. So we know that in that table customer, it's got to be able to update names. And so that's a method. That is a method that we can use to run. Up here, add item, receive payment, request back order, all of those things now become methods inside of there. So that's a class. When we're talking about programming, we talk a lot about classes because now we've made this black box called customer. And customer can do things. And so each example of customer, each instance, has the ability to do those items that are in there. But they're really a database on the backside. So we have to worry about those keys and those pieces. So, no surprise, we have to deal with both integrity and security. So they're different. Security means we want to protect it from anybody inadvertently stealing data, getting access to data they shouldn't have internally or externally. So you probably wouldn't want to have access to everybody's pay records. That tends to cause issues. Integrity controls mean that the inputs and outputs, our data is accurate or it's integral. In other words, if I send data in and I pull data out, I'm not having any of these lost updates or any other issues with that data. The data is secure. We haven't written anything that's going to manipulate our data in an odd manner. So, here we have a typical company. Here we have our internet pipeline coming in. It hits some kind of either a firewall or a router, or both, or a whole list of other things. So, it comes in, and then off that internal network, we have our servers. We have our computers that are in the office. And then we may have some company pieces outside that we have to access. So those tablets of the people that are doing the ordering. Maybe you have a time clock system that is accessible outside. Those kinds of attributes. So we have to make sure that we're able to move the data that needs to be in, that it's accurately done, and it's securely done. We're not leaving data out hanging around. Well, there's a lot of things in our database we talk about on transactions. So transactions means that it completes its cycle. So it not only do we add data, it's put into the database, we say it's done, and it completely cycles through there. Transactions need the ability to roll back. If it starts to go through and then an error happens, it needs to roll back to that pre-transaction state. So we also need to make sure that transactions are logged. Think about something like, well, an accounting software package. That accounting software package typically keeps a running journal or a running log of everything that happens. Yes, if you make a mistake, you have the ability to correct it, but it has a transactional record of that. And then we need to make sure we safeguard all those things so that we keep a backup of that database. And if it's a database that's running 24 hours a day, that becomes a little more of a challenge. We have to somehow grab that data while it's moving, capture an image of it, so we can roll it back at any time. So when we put data in, we need to think about what we need to limit or control that data. So range checks. So we can't enter something odd. Perhaps enabling some filtering so that we can't do a SQL injection attack. If I'm putting in a birthday, making sure that it fits the model or the style of what you need. But also making sure you label that so it's correct, so you get the right data in. So different masks. We just changed over from Verizon to a new phone company called Visible. I'm saving money. I'll give them a little plug. They're actually owned by Verizon, but the price went from, for me and all of us, went from $260 to $105 a month. So they have a single line plan, $40 a month, including taxes. Pretty good deal. When you went through the form to change, even though they're owned by Verizon, they're kind of a spin-off of Verizon, to change out from one phone number to another, everything was very carefully done in terms of your phone number had to have the right digits, and then it would do a check. So it data checked you by texting you and saying, hey, are you really wanting to port this number out? Yep, sure am. All of the fields had to be completed correctly. And it actually contacted the mothership of Verizon or whatever other partner you're porting numbers out. So you'd have to put in things like account numbers. And those account number fields were set up for every different vendor. So they would go out to T-Mobile and see, your account number looks like this. It's 7 digits plus a dash plus 4 more digits. So that we could have those done. And when you finished, I started trying to check out. It said, hey, you missed a field. You didn't put in your street number. So we want to make sure, and you'll usually put some kind of a check in there to make sure that all that data is done correctly. It's completely done. And then we can also look at how do the data correlate between the two of them. And so sometimes we even put some checks in, and we'll do things, put in your birth date, and then at the bottom we'll say, what's your age? Well, that seems silly, except we're checking to make sure that you really are who you say you are. So a website, for example, that's designed for adult content. Not that kind of website. I see your look. So Facebook, for example, that says you have to be 13 or over. Or a website that allows you to have the Wine of the Month Club shipped to you might have that restriction. And so they might do a double check just to kind of see if they catch you if you're trying to cheat on that. But it will also likely go out and check other things to make sure that your name and your address are all correlated. So we can double check and triple check that data because it takes far longer to clean up that data once it's in our system, in our database, than it does to clean it before it comes out there. Well, putting data in, we need security control. And if I'm moving data electronically from one system to another, I need to make sure that it's done accurately, correctly, securely. It's encrypted and a whole litany of things to make sure that that data transfer goes seamlessly. But I also have that same issue when I export data. So we want to make sure that only those people that have a need to this data can see it. I can't see financial aid data, and there's a really good reason for that. I don't need it, I don't want it, don't need it, and it's not legal for me to see it. If I'm at a hospital, I can't log in and see patient information of a patient that's not mine. Again, we're controlling that data, we're controlling that access. A lot of places say, you know what, we're going to control things like printers and physical access. Some companies have went as far as they will take hot glue guns or even epoxy and glue all of the USB ports shut. So you can't plug in a flash drive and steal data from them. They will limit printing because they don't want you to take that copy out. They will have you working on this data where you're logged into a physical system here, but you may do some kind of VPN tunnel. You're not taking that data out with you. We want to protect it. We want to make sure it's there. Printouts are dangerous because they end up just getting thrown away. And companies have lost millions of dollars by things like dumpster diving. People are willing to go buy your mailbox. Think about how many of those credit card offers you probably get in the mailbox. Somebody walks by and grabs your mail and says, hey, it's already pre-filled out with all your information for the most part. I'm going to just add a salary and a couple other pieces. I'm going to change that address to mine. Boom, they've got a credit card in your name. So we need to make sure we control that access of what's in there. How do I control that? We have the same thing with equipment. How do I control who has access to it? More and more things hard-coded, so things like cars, trucks, construction equipment have built-in GPS trackers so we can see where you're at and make sure it doesn't get stolen. The best model I have of that, which I think this is interesting, and not necessarily in a good way, we have a lot of people who have really bad credit, and they also need vehicles. They've made bad choices, life has hit them in the face, whatever. So you can go to a lot of places called a buy here, pay here lot. If you drive by, you'll see them, and they're not typically really great cars. But, for only $500 and then $100 a week for the rest of your life, you can have a 1982 Ford Tornado or whatever it happens to be. But most of the time they have a GPS locator on them that is also tied to a kill switch, and they will shut the car off if you don't make a payment. They make a ton of money on those guys because they will go back, repossess it, and resell it to somebody else who's also got bad credit. Kind of falls in that same thing as payday lending, where they're lending you at 30% interest a month or something odd. Backup. I cannot stress this enough. That data you create is probably more valuable than the building you are in. The data we have in our administration building sitting there in my PSC is more valuable than this physical campus. Tornado comes in, wipes out this physical campus, our data is still secure, and because we have what's called a off-site hotspot, so in other words, we don't actually store any data here, it's stored only in Lincoln and Omaha, geographically separated. We could put up some temporary buildings, we could buy a building somewhere, and we could still continue. That data is the most important thing we have. It in almost every company. There are some examples. So in your coffee shop, it's probably a little less valuable than it is here at Peru, right? Does that make some kind of sense? But if you didn't have a customer list, and if they're doing any wholesale distribution, those kinds of things, if you don't have all that information, if you don't know who owes you money and who you owe money to, you're in trouble. Protect that data. There's an interesting story right now going on in Nebraska, and I don't know if you guys have been following it. Several years ago, they moved the state fair from Lincoln to Grand Island. Everybody kind of hopefully has seen that. And there's been a lot of issues with they claim they're losing money, they claim they're going bankrupt, and the board has now actually been sued because of they violated the open meetings laws and all different kinds of things. And now the latest one to show up out of this debacle out there is they claim that the CFO and one of the other accountants that they fired wiped their computers on the way out the door. So in other words, there isn't a backup. They don't know what they owe, who they owe it to, what has been paid, what hasn't been paid, what their bank account balances are, or anything. So clearly there were some structural deficiencies. If an employee is able to delete their computer and that data isn't stored somewhere else, that's a structural issue with your company to start with. So we need to figure out how do we back up databases. Well, great, we have ways we can do it. Backup tapes, backup drives, backup off-site onto the cloud, making sure that it's encrypted. But what about hardware? Do we have an ability to get back hardware easily? And this one is a little different. If I just need a computer, can I make an emergency run to Best Buy and go buy a computer? I could do that. Can I go buy a server at Best Buy? No. And if I have a specialized need for a server, so I'm the county of courthouse and I'm still using an AS400 from IBM or a Z machine, can I go get it? No. I'm weeks away from having one unless one of the vendors in the country happens to have one, and then I may be able to get one shipped to me in a week. So we need to think about that hardware. Are we tied to specific hardware? And if so, is there a way around that? What else can we do? What about those software applications? We've spent a lot of money on Microsoft Office as an example, and it's one of the cheaper ones. Microsoft Office on a volume license, if I purchase it, is $437 on the last price sheet I looked at. That's a lot of money. If I lose 25 computers and I don't have those licenses and I don't have that stuff backed up to go get them from Microsoft, I'm going to have to repurchase it. And that's a cheap piece of software. These applications, if we have some custom designed software and we don't have backup install copies of it, we lose our system. That's a lot of money. The content management system that we're going to put in at our college or use, $150,000 the first year for our website. We spend about $200,000 a year with Blackboard, making sure that that is all backed up, those apps are all working. Our network pieces, we may have proprietary network design or we may have something odd on our network. We need to make sure that that's up and running. Even if it's as simple as replacing a switch. if we don't have the configuration stored for it, it can be a lot of time and effort for somebody to come in then and restore that. So switches typically, at least the way we store them here, they have what's called VLANs. And we've all seen that it's a virtual LAN. So different ports can be assigned to different networks, and that way they can't see each other. So my lab can't see the faculty, the staff can't see the faculty, the students can't certainly see anything. We had a guy a couple years ago, there's a data closet across the hallway, and he said, man, this looks like a jumbled mess. Here's my idea. I'm going to make all these cables exactly the right length, and I'm going to go in on a Monday, and I'm just going to fix all that and make it all look pretty. Except nobody really had it written down where the VLANs were all mapped to, and it took them several weeks to try to recreate and figure out what was going on our campus. We had the same issue in this building and several others when they remodeled them. Those thermostats are actually tied to an IP address. Well, our maintenance staff isn't real network savvy. They didn't realize that. So when we pulled all those thermostats out, they redid the building and they just started putting them in. Nobody had marked what room they were in. They just started putting them in random rooms. So the control software would say, man, I'm going to turn the heat on in the computer lab. Well, that computer lab thermostat is actually setting in 326 or something. And so there was no continuity. And again, because that wasn't all documented, it wasn't stored somewhere. How do I do that? Off-site versus off-site copies. So I can make a backup and I can do it locally and it's great. I'm LPS and my administrative building burns down because an employee got mad and decided to light the building on fire. Great, I just burned up my backups along with it. So anytime somebody says, well, I have a backup hard drive, I plug you in, and then I leave sitting in the office, you're not backing up against worst case. So you always want to have some form of off-site backup, whether you're doing it once a week, you're doing it in the cloud. We also need internal controls, and we need to think about those from developing our software, from developing our processes, developing our procedures. So even in the case of a small business, who can I pick on? I'm going to pick on your coffee shop again. So your owner, if he checks out and he takes the end of the day, creates a bill or a stack of receipts and invoices and everything and sends it to the bank, can they actually defraud their own company? And it's happened a lot. Yeah. So you always want that idea usually of a checks and balances, multiple people handling cash. So that fraud triangle really comes in. If we give them opportunity, we can kind of pull the opportunity away a little bit. But we can't really fix motive, and rationalization is easier. So what we can take out is that opportunity for them to do that. And it's always interesting to see these tales of, a nunnery in Omaha, for example, that one of the nuns stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from to go gambling. Well, I guess. So how do we do that? Separation of duties. So one of the things that a lot of companies do, and it makes sense, somebody handling payroll, for example, has a mandatory 2-week vacation. They don't get to just work through it. They're gone, off-site. Somebody else has to handle payroll. Why? Because it reveals if anything is hinky in payroll. There have been many cases where people in HR doing payroll have created fictitious employees, employed their children, and just sent them checks because they look like they showed up on there. Those kinds of things we need to do. Asset control. Well, anytime people handle cash, monitor it. Have somebody else also. 2 eyes are better than one. Hopefully they won't collude. But I like the idea of even the cameras and a person. If I'm handling something, I don't want to be accused of it if it disappears later on down that rabbit hole. So those cameras and those things can be sold as a prevention tool for us. Looking at the records. So if I'm doing accounting software, all those transactions need to be tracked so that if we need to go back in, we can actually look at where things disappeared, what went wrong. So Small businesses, how do I handle cash? And you think about it, usually it's pretty informal. How much of that cash wanders off? How many times do we have bars and things where the employee takes $3 for a drink and just stuffs it in their pocket instead of putting it in the till? It happens a lot, and so we need to worry about it. In fact, if you take the loss prevention classes and things we have here and other places, you're going to find out that most studies will tell you that over half of the loss in a company, those like shrinkages and cash loss, are internal, not external. Because they have that opportunity to do that. So we need to protect all of your equipment, processes. We need to protect those transmissions. And so this is becoming more and more critical. Making sure that we have an encrypted connection between our two locations. We're sending data more and more often. We have remote offices. We may be sending data to, we'll pick on your insurance companies. When you go to sign up somebody, you're probably on their web portal, and you're signing them in. Making sure that data, because you're putting in identifiable information, you're putting in things like social security numbers, banking account numbers, credit cards, whatever, that is protected from one end to the other. And that we don't have a man-in-the-middle attack. So we have to make sure that you're not doing silly things like meeting somebody in a coffee shop. You're not using a VPN. You're just logging into what maybe is me sitting there with my pineapple, and I'm watching everything you do and send company information in. You're not guilty yet? Okay, just checking. So we also need to think about limits. And I'm a big fan of only giving access to those people who need access. So if you don't need access to it, we don't typically grant it to you. If for some reason that changes, we can then escalate that. Does it cause a little bit of inconvenience? Yes. We're always balancing convenience versus security. One of them that's happening now a lot is the idea of multi-factor authentication. So it's not just a password. It's at least 2 factors. If you go to your bank site, you will have to do that. Some students now are even having to do that when they log into Blackboard. You'll see I have to do a 2-factor authentication. I have a username, a password, and then I have to get a credential sent to my phone, and I acknowledge it on my phone because it's something I have. So we're adding not only something I know, but something I have. So you're seeing that a lot. Some companies are even more secure than that and requiring biometric data and other things. Who has access? Making sure we've turned off all those default accounts. So a lot of database systems have default accounts when you set them up that give you the ability to do demos and those kinds of things. Used to be a long time ago on some of the SQL systems, they used an account called Scott and Tiger. It was a default account. It's almost now my habit whenever I sit down and I can get access to a database, I look at the defaults and I go, have they closed those off? Scott, Tiger, admin, those kinds of things. And if I have a little bit of knowledge ahead of time of what they're using, hey, I'm going to try some of those that I know might break it. So making sure that only those people that have authorization are there. If you're not registered, it kicks you out. Even things like passwords where it's inconvenient because it's a pain in the butt, because Mark or Mindy or somebody is always going to have their passwords reset because they forget them day to day, but where it locks you out after 3 attempts at your password. So I can't use an automated tool to sit there and hammer at it 1,000,000 times trying to guess your password. Those kinds of the things are what we're looking at. So we're trying to figure out how we can be secure. So think about that business, and your business may be completely different. How do I secure it? Do we have physical security? So that idea of limiting those people that have access on the inside, that have access to that information. So I have weirdly administrative rights on a ton of systems, and I try to set them up where while I can administer a system, I don't want to see your data, and I want that data to be as hidden as it can from me. I want to remove that opportunity. I don't want to go steal from your company. I want to make sure that I don't have those other 2 elements in there. So things like former employees. Making sure you have a really good system of, hey, I fired Tom. Tom needs to be his administrative access cut today. He doesn't have email. It doesn't have those kinds of things available. So we want to make sure we cut those off as quick as possible. You're going to experience that as a student. We're going to fairly quickly cut off your access to email. So data encryption. So really, we're going to scramble data from one side of the conversation to the other. We talk a lot about that in network security, and we really could have classes just on encryption. There's really two basic methods. Symmetric means we use the same key. Asymmetric means we use a public key and two private keys. Symmetric can work. It can be very secure. The problem is, how do I get that key transported to you or the other person without revealing what that key is? Asymmetric is what we use in websites, for example, on the HTTPS. I don't have to send you a key every time. We work on this asymmetric method of being able to do that. Digital signatures are something that more and more companies are finding are useful. Now, if we have a secure website, you have to get one. So there are companies, DigiSign, Certivate, Komodo, hundreds of them are willing to sell you a certificate. It says, this is really who I am. And you go through a vetting process to say that really we are Peru State College. Really we are Marty's Coffee Shop or whatever. So when you have a website, it will show up and say in that little HTTPS symbol up on the left, it'll actually show you who you are. So it lists who you are, who gave you that authorization, and there's a process in here for revocation. So if that certificate gets revoked because we find out that somebody hacked or somehow managed to get one for Peru State College, we have a way that we can pull that back out. So if I'm going to any website that I need to have secure traffic on, bank sites, Blackboard, anything, make sure you see HTTPS. You see some other ones, SSL, secure sockets, which is really kind of the way we do most of HTTPS. You may be setting up 2 points, and you may be using IPsec to set up 2 remote sites. So it's a way that we can create that encrypted tunnel between those 2 sites. So if you have security in a company and they're willing, it's a larger company, they're making some money, they're moving products, it pays. It's very good to call in a security expert. Bring somebody in who has experience with those. Bring in a networking or a routing engineer if you're going to set up some remote sites. Don't guess on how you can do it. Yes, I can go down to Best Buy and I can get a router that says it has VPN and with a push of a button on each end, I'm magically connected. But are you magically insecure? Yes. So this chapter, we have a lot of pieces. Some of them will apply to your company, some might not. Things like, how do I remove opportunities for theft? Applicable to every company, I think. I don't think there's anybody that doesn't have that issue. Whether it's a restaurant, how do I keep employees from, taking home an extra T-bone steak? I've seen that happen when I worked. I used to work for a company called Klepper Oil. Employees would take stuff that you wouldn't even believe, and you'd catch them on camera, and they'd go, well, I needed a 300-count package of napkins that I could shove in my backpack. So how do I protect all those assets? How do I design around them? All right, so this week you do not have a discussion board. You do have a small assignment based out of the book, one of these little case studies. I will be trying to get some feedback to you here in the next couple of days. So obviously Tuesday is my heavy teaching day, but in between classes I have some time. And then hopefully tonight also I can stay up because I don't have anything better to do, and I will go through and start grading. My wife's in Atlanta, so I'm home alone, no children, no wife. So we're either going to do that or we're going to sit there and play on the Nintendo Switch all night. One of the two. I don't know. Any questions? Was that quick enough so we can get out of here for Wednesday? I shoved through a lot of information really, really quickly.